She wasn't just playing an independent woman. She was one, and almost nobody knew it. 6 of the 8 faces you remember from that cramped New York apartment are gone now. One passed just months ago. Their resting places are scattered across this country, from the flatlands of Texas to the shores of Massachusetts. But before we talk about where they ended up, we need to talk about who they were and what they left behind. The woman the whole show was built for. Marlo Thomas was 28 years old when she stepped onto that Manhattan set and became Anne Marie, a bright-eyed, restless young actress who had packed her bags and moved to the city entirely on her own terms. No husband waiting at home, no father down the hall pulling strings, no man deciding what her future was allowed to look like. Thomas played her with this wonderful, slightly frantic energy, a woman in go-go boots spending her rent money on headshots and absolutely refusing to feel guilty about it. She came from a world of fame and privilege. Her father was Danny Thomas, the beloved comedian who founded St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Her godmother was Hollywood legend Loretta Young. She could have coasted on that name forever. She didn't. Instead, she earned a teaching degree from the University of Southern California, wanting, in her own words, a piece of paper that said she was qualified to do something in the world. In 1965, Mike Nichols cast her in the London production of Barefoot in the Park, and from there, everything accelerated. Here is the part almost every viewer missed. Marlo Thomas didn't just star in That Girl. She owned it, completely. And what she did with that ownership changed television forever. Thomas founded Daisy Productions with one specific purpose: to create and control the series herself. She served as its uncredited executive producer, making her one of only 2 women in the entire television industry at that time who had full ownership over their own show. The other was Lucille Ball. Every other actor on that call sheet went home with a paycheck. Thomas went home with a paycheck and the production profits. And when ABC executives demanded the series end with Anne walking down the aisle and marrying her boyfriend, Thomas pushed back hard. She won. The finale sent Anne to a women's liberation rally instead of a wedding. That was no accident. That was a woman in complete control of her story. That control built an estimated personal fortune of $150 million by 2026. In her personal life, there was one great love talk show host, Phil Donahue. She met him as a guest on his program, married him in May of 1980, and remained by his side for 44 years, raising his 5 children as her own, until his death in August of 2024. Today, at 88, she still serves as the National Outreach Director for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, the place her father built, and remains the creative force behind Free to Be You and Me. Anne Marie was a fictional symbol of a woman standing on her own. Marlo Thomas was the real one, the woman who actually owned the show that symbol lived inside. The man who stood beside her for all 5 seasons. Ted Bessell played Donald Hollinger, the patient, good-natured news magazine writer in love with a woman whose life was permanent, beautiful chaos. Bessell gave Donald a quiet, dry wit, the look of a man who had simply accepted that the whirlwind wasn't stopping and had learned to enjoy it. Decades after the show wrapped, strangers would stop Marlo Thomas on the street with the same question: "How is Donald?" As though he were a real person they genuinely missed. What most of those people never knew was just how remarkable the man playing Donald actually was. Born in Queens, Bessell was a child prodigy at the piano who performed a solo recital at Carnegie Hall at the age of 12. He once seriously considered joining the priesthood. He studied at Georgetown and the University of Colorado, before training under the legendary acting teacher Sanford Meisner in New York. And here's the irony: the network didn't even want him. According to series co-creator Bill Persky, ABC pushed to have Bessel removed from the role of Donald Hollinger during the show's run. He survived that pressure, and then made a decision that ultimately defined his legacy far more than any acting role ever could. He moved behind the camera. In 1989, he shared an Emmy Award as a producer of The Tracey Ullman Show, a prize no performance had ever brought him. The man the network tried to replace ended up holding a statue his doubters never did. But there's something about Ted Bessel's final years that almost no one talks about: a reunion that was planned, a film that was almost made, and a secret he kept hidden from the public for years. His personal life took time to settle. An early marriage to a dancer ended in divorce. In 1982, he married artist Lenel Nari, with whom he had 2 daughters, Sarah and Mary. He and Marlo Thomas remained close long after the cameras stopped rolling. So close, in fact, that the two had begun discussing a reunion film, imagining Anne and Donald crossing paths again 25 years later and falling in love all over again. That film never got made. Shortly after 1 a.m. on October 6, 1996, Ted Bessel died at UCLA Medical Center from a ruptured aortic aneurysm. He was 61, though obituaries printed 57, because for years he had quietly been shaving his age down. At the time of his death, he was actively preparing to direct the feature film version of Bewitched. He rests today at Woodlawn Memorial Cemetery in Santa Monica, California, beneath a marker that reads, "Husband, father, son, and brother." Donald Hollinger was the steady man who waited in the wings while someone else stood in the light. Ted Bessel walked into the light himself and won the prize the leading man never did. The third name on this list barely registered when the show began, and that is precisely what makes his story so extraordinary. Dabney Coleman appeared in the early episodes of That Girl as Dr. Leon Bessemer, one of those working actors filling out the background of Anne's New York world. A face you wouldn't have circled, a name you wouldn't have remembered. You would have been wrong. Nobody in that studio had any idea what they were actually looking at. They saw a character actor filling out a minor role. What they couldn't see was the man who would spend the next 5 decades constructing the most entertaining villain in American entertainment, a performer who made a career and a fortune out of being someone you couldn't stand. Dabney Coleman was born in Austin, Texas in 1932. He attended the Virginia Military Institute, served in the United States Army, and had already begun studying law at the University of Texas when he made the decision that changed everything. He walked away from the courtroom and walked toward the stage. He trained at the New York Playhouse alongside an entire generation of actors who would go on to reshape American performance. The breakthrough didn't come fast. Small parts carried him through his 30s. Then, in his 40s, Norman Lear cast him as the slippery, scheming Mayor Merle Jeter on Mary Hartman, and Coleman himself described what happened next with perfect clarity. From that part spawned everything. Everything, as it turned out, meant a career built entirely on playing men nobody could stomach. He was the smug, sexist boss in 9 to 5, the insufferable soap opera director in Tootsie, the cold federal operator in War Games, and in the final chapter of his career, John Dutton Sr. on Yellowstone, a role that introduced him to a whole new generation of viewers who had no idea they were watching someone who had been doing this for 60 years. Across nearly 200 films and television projects, he built an estimated net worth of $5 million. In 1987, he won an Emmy for his dramatic performance in the television movie Sworn to Silence, proof, if anyone still needed it, that the man famous for smirking could absolutely shatter you when he decided to. The people who knew him best told a different story than the screen did. Married twice, father of 4, Coleman was insistent that the cruelty he performed on camera was simply a game. "That's just a guy I'm playing," he once said, "just to fool around." His daughter Quincy called him a teacher, a hero, and a king. The sneer was a costume. The man underneath it was something else entirely. He died at his home in Santa Monica on the afternoon of May 16, 2024, at the age of 92, his heart finally giving out after years of congestive failure. His daughter said he moved through the final chapter of his life with elegance and mastery. The Texan who spent a lifetime conquering Hollywood was carried back to where he started and buried at Oakwood Cemetery Annex in Austin, the city that made him. Dr. Leon Bessemer was a forgettable background role in someone else's story. Dabney Coleman became the man America loved to despise for 50 straight years, while everyone who actually knew him insists he was the gentlest person in the room. The fourth name on this list played the wall Ann's independence kept crashing into. Lou Parker was 58 years old when he first appeared on screen as Lou Marie, Ann's overprotective, wide-eyed father, a man whose expression suggested he believed every single person his daughter might encounter was some variety of maniac or criminal. Parker gave the character a Brooklyn Belt delivery, a man perpetually one breath away from full combustion, yet warm enough underneath all of it that audiences forgave him every single time. You couldn't stay angry at Lou Marie, no matter how ridiculous he got. That was the trick, and Parker had spent a lifetime learning how to pull it off. Born in Brooklyn in 1907 into a theatrical family, he came up through vaudeville, sharpened by mentors like Milt, on Burl and Bob Hope, and went on to entertain troops across the South Pacific during the war. Broadway knew him well, from Girl Crazy to Are You With It? He was a craftsman of the old school, someone who had been working the stage and the audience since before television existed. But here is where his story diverges sharply from Marlo Thomas's. There was no production company, no residual empire, no ownership stake. Parker was a working actor in the truest sense. He showed up, he delivered, he collected his paycheck, and he moved on. His greatest fame arrived in his 60s, on a hit he had no financial piece of whatsoever. What he did have, near the very end, was one final moment of pure triumph. After That Girl Rapped, Parker was cast as Senex in the celebrated 1972 Broadway revival of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, opposite Phil Silvers, and he went out at the absolute peak of his powers. His marriage was one of the great quiet partnerships in show business. In 1956, he wed comedian Betty Keane, one half of the Keane sisters act, and together they built both a comedy double act and a family, raising a daughter named Dearie, who eventually settled in London. They stayed together until the end. That end came without warning. Just a couple of months after the Forum revival closed, Lou Parker died of cancer at St. Clair's Hospital in New York City on October 27, 1972, 2 days before his 65th birthday. And here is where something strange happens. The trail goes cold in a way it almost never does for someone this well known. No public cemetery record exists for him. The man who spent 50 years commanding stages and filling rooms left no marked place for anyone to find. For someone so loud, so present, so loved, the silence is startling. Lou Marie was a father terrified that show business would swallow his daughter whole. Behind that character stood Lou Parker, a man who had lived inside that same world for half a century, scowling on camera at the only life he had ever truly known. The fifth name on this list flickered through a single season of That Girl, and then detonated into something far larger. Ruth Boozy played Margie Peterson, a friend of Anne's, and she brought a physical comedic energy to every scene that was impossible to ignore. Within a year, those same hands would be swinging a purse at a dirty old man on the most-watched comedy show in the country. She was a sculptor's daughter from Rhode Island, raised in Connecticut, a high school head cheerleader who enrolled at 17 in the Pasadena Playhouse, where her classmates happened to include two young men named Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman. On Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, Boozy became Gladys Ormsby, the drab, put-upon, hairnet-wearing spinster who refused to be stepped on. Boozy understood exactly who that character represented. Gladys, she said, stood for the overlooked, for the taken for granted, for everyone who had ever been dismissed without a second thought. When Gladys fought back, she was fighting for all of them. The recognition was real, and it came fast. A Golden Globe in 1973, 5 Emmy nominations, and the singular distinction of being the only performer to appear in every single episode of Laugh-In across all 6 seasons. Her financial story ended better than most in this cast. Salary figures from her performing years stayed private, but in 2017 she and her husband opened a seafood restaurant called The Catch in Fort Worth, Texas. A second life, in a second city, long after the cameras had stopped. Her husband was the great constant of her life. After an early marriage ended, Boozy married actor Kent Perkins in Las Vegas in 1978. They stayed together for more than 43 years, eventually settling on a ranch near Stephenville, Texas, and even acting together one final time in a 2021 film. Then the long fade began. Diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2012 and struck by a series of strokes in 2022, she spent her final years in hospice care on that same ranch. She died peacefully in her sleep on May 1, 2025, at the age of 88. One day before the end, Perkins posted a message on her behalf to her fans. In it, she told them she had probably had more fun making those shows than they ever had watching them. She was carried back to California and laid to rest at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills, returning, at the end, to the city that had first made her. Gladys Ormsby was a beaten-down woman who refused to stay down. Ruth Boozy was a 30-year-old building a Golden Globe out of that refusal, and she met the disease that took her memory still laughing, still entirely on her own terms. Of everyone in this cast, Ruth Boozy's farewell is the one that stays with you longest. The sixth name played the quiet counterweight to all that fatherly noise. Rosemary DeCamp was 55 when she began appearing as Helen Marie, Anne's soft-spoken, steady mother, the parent who understood her daughter. Even in the moments her husband absolutely could not. DeCamp brought a settled, reassuring warmth to the role, the feeling of a woman who had already put the kettle on and would listen to anything without flinching. She made calm itself look like an act of love. Her path to that chair was long and unusual. Born in Prescott, Arizona in 1910, and raised in a musical family, DeCamp earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree from Mills College, intending to become a teacher before radio pulled her sideways, casting her as a nurse on the long-running Dr. Christian series in 1937. From there, the industry made one decision about her and never revisited it. She was cast as somebody's mother endlessly, relentlessly, across 5 decades, James Cagney's mother in Yankee Doodle Dandy. Ronald Reagan's mother in This Is the Army. Doris Day's mother in On Moonlight Bay. The typecast was a cage, however gracefully she wore it. Her income came not from any single landmark role, but from 50 years of consistent, reliable work, including a long run as the on-air spokesperson for 20 Mule Team Borax, while her work on That Girl earned her an Emmy nomination and a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Her marriage was the rarest thing in this industry, a long one. DeCamp wed municipal judge John Shidler in 1941 and stayed married to him for 56 years, raising 4 daughters together in a quiet corner of Torrance, California, until his death in 1997. She had built off camera the exact life she kept performing on it, a stable home that lasted. She outlived her husband by 4 years. On February 20th, 2001, Rosemary DeCamp died of pneumonia at her Torrance home, surrounded by the family she had raised. She was 90. There is no grave to visit. She was cremated and her ashes were entrusted to her children, the woman everyone called Mother, resting privately in the keeping of her own. Helen Marie was the perfect television mother to one young woman. Rosemary DeCamp was the perfect mother to Cagney, to Reagan, to Doris Day, and to 4 daughters of her own. The only role in the end that was real. The 7th name draws a blank today, until you hear the voice. Billy DeWolf recurred in the early seasons as Jules Benedict, Anne's pompous, theatrical acting coach. The kind of man who made it perfectly clear that working with unpolished young actors was a form of personal suffering he endured purely out of professional obligation. DeWolf delivered every cutting line with a prissy, exquisite precision that somehow turned cruelty into comedy. There was a hidden warmth buried beneath all that disdain, and that warmth was exactly what kept the character from becoming unwatchable. His beginnings were humble and distant. Born in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1907, son of a Welsh bookbinder who had his sights set on raising a Baptist minister, DeWolf spent a brief stretch of his childhood in Wales before returning to America. He entered vaudeville as a teenager, served in the Navy during the war, and built a career as a Hollywood film comedian through the 1940s. Financially, he followed the classic studio second banana pattern: steady film and stage work, regular appearances on late-night television, no ownership stake, no residual empire, a working man's career. The comeback that might have rewritten that story never arrived. In 1973, he was cast in the Broadway revival of Irene, alongside Debbie Reynolds, playing Madame Lucy, a role that could have been a defining late career moment. Cancer forced him out before rehearsals were finished. The man who replaced him, George S. Irving, went on to win a Tony Award in the very role DeWolf had been promised. He kept his private life almost entirely closed off from the public eye, never married, counted Doris Day among his closest and most enduring friends, and worked alongside her as her boss on the Doris Day Show. In late February of 1974, suffering from advanced lung cancer, DeWolf entered UCLA Medical Center. He died there on March 5th, at the age of 67. But here is the detail that stays with you. Before he went, he had recorded a vocal track for Marlo Thomas's Free to Be You and Me. The animated special built around it aired on ABC just 6 days after his death, sending his voice out across the country one final time, long after he was already gone. His body was carried back across the continent and buried at Mount Wollaston Cemetery in Quincy, Massachusetts, returned to the same New England ground he had started from. Jules Benedict was a sour footnote in a young actress's story. Billy DeWolf became the scheming magician in Frosty the Snowman, a voice millions of children hear every December without ever once learning whose it was. One man from this cast is still working the room at 92, and the role you know him best from has nothing to do with Anne Marie's apartment. Bernie Kopel was 33 years old when he appeared as Jerry Bauman, Donald's easygoing, already married F. Riend, the guy whose settled domesticity made Donald look like a free spirit by comparison. Audiences who recognized that face from that girl were about to start seeing it everywhere. On A German Spy, in A Witch's Apothecary, and eventually on a ship's doctor sailing the Pacific every week for a decade. A Brooklyn boy with a degree from New York University and 2 years of Navy service behind him, Kopel built a career as a comedy specialist, more than 100 credits, rarely a year out of work. His financial security came from sheer, sustained endurance, but the real payoff had a name: Dr. Adam Bricker. The ship's doctor on the Love Boat, a character name Kopel invented himself, ran for 250 episodes across 10 years, produced by Aaron Spelling. That role, on one of the most heavily rerun series in television history, generated a steady stream of residuals that outlasted almost anything else he ever did. Today he serves as an ambassador for the cruise line that inspired the show. His real life ran in the opposite direction from the character that made him famous. On screen, Doc Bricker chased a different woman every voyage and never once settled down. Off screen, Kopel waited until his 60s to become a full-time, devoted father, raising 2 young sons, Adam and Josh, with his wife Katrina, whom he married in 1997 after 2 earlier marriages. He has said his sons, not any role, not any residual check, are the legacy he is most proud of. He is 92 years old today, living in Los Angeles. His last screen appearances came in 2022, and he still turns up at Love Boat reunion cruises. Still the same warm, effortless presence audiences first encountered nearly 60 years ago. Jerry Bauman was the married friend hovering at the edge of someone else's romance. Bernie Kopel played a doctor who committed to no one, and then spent his real 70s and 80s becoming the family man that character never once managed to be. From an unmarked silence in New York to a churchyard in Austin to the granite of Quincy, Massachusetts, the cast of That Girl came to rest in places the show never filmed.